of interest to many of you. And looking forward to getting into introducing our guest here in just a moment. But just a refresher or a reminder or introduction of Right Recruiter for those who might be hearing about it for the first time. So our mission is very clear. We want to help conservatives become great campaigners so that they can win, and then we want them to be really strong governing so that they earn re-election and that we get to keep making positive change here in the country or in the provincial level or municipal or at any level that conservatives are elected. So we try to cover off a variety of topics. We've been focusing a lot on sort of the governing side of things and talking about ministers' offices and running in provincial governments and so on. But we're going to be a little bit tonight because really important country and the conservative movement in Canada overall, and honestly the future of our country. Conservatives will be up for election in at least 4 provinces that need to be, those elections all need to be held before October 2025. That's BC, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And then obviously we are on the track for a huge federal showdown. And I know the phrase, the most important election of our lifetime, gets raised a lot and maybe sometimes thrown around a little too much, but really I can't think of a more accurate phrase for when we all work together to help Pierre Poilievre become Prime Minister in 2025. So even if we do basic math on the back of a napkin, that means in the next year, there will be at least 600 Conservative campaign managers for over 600 local Conservative campaigns needed across the country. So tonight, we're going to be looking at what it takes. We're going to focus on campaign management and start with what is a campaign manager and what should you be doing in that role? What shouldn't you be doing? And we want to help local Conservatives up to be strong campaign managers across the country. And to do that, we have truly one of the best in the business, and that is Jenny Byrne. And Jenny is joining us here tonight. And so I'm going to read Jenny's bio here so I don't get it wrong. Jenny is the president and CEO of Jenny Byrne and Associates, which is a leading firm in government relations, communications, and strategic advice in Canada. And I just want to say her resume, if not truly unparalleled, would certainly put her in the top tier in Canadian politics in terms of active experience. She served as the national campaign chair and deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, including the majority win in 2011. She's been named the most powerful woman in Ottawa by the Globe and Mail, has held senior positions in Queen's Park. And while certainly Pierre Poilievre had a vast and impressive team that helped secure his strong and definitive CPC leadership victory, Jenny was obviously one of the key people at the helm of that overall campaign and organization. So you've likely seen her as a pundit or landing key points on what used to be called Twitter. And so because we see her often as this national person who's leading national things, you might not know, but she has an extensive background in leading and local campaigns and running highly effective local GOTV efforts as well. So I could keep on going. I'm going to end the introduction there so we can start moving into the questions. So welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I think I have to say, the interest in you coming here and being on the webinar tonight has been overwhelming. That's why we've asked for questions to be emailed in advance so we can kind of consolidate them as best we could, because there's a lot of people tuning into this. So thanks so much. And we're looking forward to you dropping wisdom here with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Well, Steve, I was thinking it's almost been 18 years. Actually, it's been 18 years since, 18 years since we first met when I was working on Harper's transition team. Mm-hmm. You were the second person that I was part of interviewing to come into government. So
really, I didn't know I was that low on the list or high on the list. Yeah.
Well, I remember it very well. So
yeah. I do too, because I remember just trying to not throw up the entire time. I was like, just try to look conservative, just try to.
I think we're also aging ourselves.
It's true. We were very, very young back then. Just a couple tweens working in the new government. So you've obviously, we touched on the highlights of your career, in Canadian politics. We always kind of like to start with the first question here is to ask guests, what was your first role as a staffer and how did you get into that role? Like, what was your path to starting to work in politics?
Well, my first paid job in politics was for an MP called Grant McNally, who was the MP for Dudney Alouette in British Columbia. It was the Maple Ridge Mission area for those that know the West Coast geography. He was he's a wonderful man, and I started by volunteering for him and got hired. But my first kind of foray into politics was I come from the reform side of things. Back in the day, I'm from Ontario, but a reformer. And there was this thing called the Reform Youth Bus, which Corey Tenike at the time organized. And I met people like Ray Novak and Stacey Sherwood, who just two that to name a few that I worked that stayed in government and are still part of our movement now. And so I volunteered on that, and then was going to university in Ottawa, and got a paying job at the Second Cup at the Rideau Center, which still exists, and volunteered for Grant McNally, and then he hired me at 15 hours a week, which I put in probably about 40 hours a week.
Yes.
At minimum wage, and that was my very first job on Parliament Hill.
Wow. So being a reformer in Ontario, I mean, you were a bit kind of ahead of the curve on that. I think a lot of us sort of caught on to what was going on later. And then from there, I mean, you started the 15 hours a week, minimum wage, augmenting your income at that Second Cup. Probably best you didn't go to the McDonald's on Rideau Street there to try to, that's probably why you're still with us today. Where did it go from there? I mean, you obviously have moved into, more full-time, positions later on.
Yeah, well, I moved over, there was an internship program. I moved over and worked on the youth and internship program. From there, I got a job working full-time for Preston Manning in the leader's office, and then just different jobs within the party. I moved to Calgary for a couple of years, and that's when the party HQ was in Calgary. Did candidate search and selection, candidate recruitment. Moved back to Ottawa, and then just kind of it moved up from there, Steve. Like then the parties merged. I worked on Stephen Harper's leadership campaign, and then was the Ontario desk for both the 2004 and 2006 elections. And then after that, I was asked to come and help with the transition process, and then worked as Ian Brody, the Chief of Staff's senior advisor, and then became the Director of Issues Management after that, in my first foray in the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, now I really do want to get into the local side of things, but I just want to go national for just one bit more, because by the time Stephen Harper became Prime Minister, you guys on the core team, you had gone through how many elections and how short a period of time, leaderships and generals? Like it was crammed.
Well, 2 leaderships and 2 generals.
Wow.
And that was from 2002 to 2006.
And you were still standing by the end of it. Like
I was a lot younger.
As we established, we were tweens in the government. But I mean, physically, that's just got to take a toll.
You don't even realize it now. Like looking back on it, it's kind of like getting ready for an election in a minority situation. Like you kind of have no choice in it. So kind of not even thinking about it, it just kind of happens. So. Yeah. It is what it is, and you're ready. And, the adrenaline, as everyone knows, probably watching this, the adrenaline kind of kicks in, and it's not till, a week after that you're catching up on sleep.
You crash and burn for a little while. Now, as I said in your intro, I mean, most people who have gotten to know you probably gotten to know you at the national level, and they've seen you on TV and they've seen you here and there, and obviously leading national campaigns. But you've done a lot of local work, including at a very difficult time in the movement when the vote was split, and obviously there was a bigger path to try to bring things together. Do you remember what the first local campaign is that you managed?
Well, there's been so many that I played different roles in. It's hard to kind of hard to pinpoint. I think probably from a managerial point of view, we're looking at different by-elections once that I became a party staffer. Like, as I said, the Reform Youth Bus was a daily, every day we went into one riding and, knocked on doors for 6 hours, and some very nice very nice women made sandwiches and chili and that kind of stuff, and we were kind of fed and moved on to the next riding. And so I think that I would have to say by-elections have kind of been for me more of the formative in terms of management. But there's a lot, and by the way, they're all different. The objective is obviously usually to win, but every riding, Canada is such a vast country that a by-election in Brandon Souris is different than a by-election in St. Paul's, to use two different to use two kind of recent by-election examples, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Just on that, when you talk about a by-election, I mean, most in this context, we're kind of all looking at like the 4 sort of generals that are coming up, and then the federal general as well. Just quickly, like, how does a by-election tend to be a little bit different than a general election?
Well, with the by-election, there's obviously like more attention to it normally, just simply because there's nothing else going on in terms of the election sphere. It's also it can be a chance. It can be more localized. If I go back to Brandon Souris, which I was on the ground for most of it. It was an election where the Conservatives had won by 25% of the vote and only won by 3% of the vote. And then won it handily the election afterwards. By-elections are different. Turnout is much lower, and it is kind of a case by case. It's kind of a case by case basis.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So now I want to move into kind of just getting into the role of campaign manager overall. And we have, I looked at the list of registrants, and there's, a lot of names I recognize, many I don't, but I know there's a broad swath of people on this, webinar this evening. And this goes from everyone from experienced campaign managers to those who've done it once, or some who are just looking to jump in for the first time. And so kind of with the mission that we have of trying to help train up, new Conservative, campaign managers, how about we just start right there with the basics? Like, what in your view are, what are the key duties of a campaign manager, and what type of skills often make for a successful campaign manager?
Well, I guess to use kind of business school lingo, you're essentially the project manager. So you have to be able to keep a lot of balls in the air. And so I think that what the most important thing to do is, if you're managing a campaign, whether it's locally or nationally or at any level, provincially, you have to be able to build a team and manage what's going on without micromanaging. It's the fine line between not micromanaging, but yet not totally not paying attention to what is going on. It's kind of knowing what is going on in all aspects of the campaign, but not being the person that's actually doing it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Now, project management, sometimes, just to pick up on your lingo there can be really good organizers who aren't great with people in terms of, maybe are socially, uncomfortable around people. So in terms of those skills, how, is there a balance that you need between kind of the people skills in the organization, or is it just something that you can augment? If you're like, if I'm a really strong organizer, I have a volunteer coordinator or someone that can offset that. Like, how do you handle that with the people skill side?
Well, I think that, if you're going to manage campaigns, like you can have gruff people, but you have to have some form of people skills if you're going to, like manage a campaign. So if you're unable to talk to people, or if you're unable to get along with people, then you're not going to manage an effective campaign, because to be frank, you're not going to keep volunteers or people in roles working with you. So I think it's a fine line between. There's always a fine line in terms of managing people, and this isn't just for campaigns. It's for all aspects of, not just politics, of life. It is the fine line between, I guess, being a hard ass and knowing when. Knowing kind of how to deal with different people. So I think that people skills, if someone wants to manage a campaign, for anyone out there, if you don't like dealing with people, I think you're going to have to figure out a way to get over it.
Okay. No, that's great advice. And I know, I mean, like I know a lot of people who've worked with you in the past, and I mean, like they, you know, yeah, you kind of inspire kind of a great loyalty in people. And I know, kind of just talking to some folks in your company and so on too, they just, yeah, that relationship side when you connect with people, it's a great, you know.
Well, Steve, you've ran successful campaigns as well. You know what it's like. It's relationships are almost the number one thing that you need leading into a campaign. I'm sure you think the same. When you're asked to run a campaign, when you're asked to play a senior role, the first thing you think of is who are going to be the five people. Who are the first 5 people I'm going to call to enlist them into helping me in some capacity. So who are the 5 people that you trust politically, that you trust personally, that you trust to do the job? And that politics is relationships. It's for running a campaign in my 100%. Experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Knowing that you can just pick up the phone and, you know, not, you know, you can kind of start with a comfort level or just a trust that's there, that even if you have to have a disagreement with someone, you know where they're coming from and they know where you're coming from, and not just trying to.
And you should have disagreements. If I have people around me that never disagree with me, then that's not helping. That's not helping me. That's not helping whoever the candidate is. That's not helping anyone else, because I like to think I'm right most of the time, but I'm not.
Yeah, no, I that's great advice. And I remember, I mean, just to pull a quick example out of the air, after Prime Minister Harper won, I remember reading, probably like anyone else did, the Paul Wells, I think it was the Paul Wells debrief on how the election really went down, and interviewing some of Paul Martin's team who actually used the term groupthink. And they were talking about how their team was working together, and they meant it in a positive type of, we're in such simpatico. And Paul kind of pointed out, well, actually groupthink means that you're just all kind of moving in this, this direction and not challenging each other. So anyway.
You can't drink each other's bathwater. So
yes. It's disgusting, but you make the point. So on the flip side of what makes a good campaign manager, what are kind of the common mistakes that you've seen over the years of people managing campaigns, where they get either distracted or do things that reduce their chances of being successful?
Well, I think it's the it's the exact opposite of what we're saying. We're saying people that aren't able to delegate, that can't kind of keep balls in the air, people that have that focus solely on one area of a campaign and kind of leave the rest to chance. We all have skill sets in terms of what we're predisposed. We're humans. We all gravitate to do what we like doing or what we're good at doing. For me, I love the ground game. I love that kind of stuff. So if you were to put me into a campaign office, the first thing I'm going to do is gravitate over to the wall that has the maps and the data and what have you. Someone else may gravitate over to, the person putting together the lit or what have you. And we all gravitate to what we're good at doing. But with management, you have to kind of step back from that and oversee kind of everything. So it's kind of a lack of delegation. I think those I think are probably the most, anyone listening to this, anyone that's worked with campaigns, that's probably the most frustrating thing possible, because you're either going to have a campaign manager who is kind of up your grill, depending on what they have, or a campaign manager that seemingly doesn't care with what you're doing. You also have to be able to deal with different candidates. Candidates are none of them are the same as Steve. They're all a little bit. They're all unique, and they all have their own idiosyncrasies as well as their own their own priorities, right? Yeah. And so some are happy to go out and door knock. Some are not. Some candidates, and it becomes, as the campaign goes on, as you know, their idiosyncrasies become like more idiosyncratic. So. Candidates can decide they don't want to share walk sheets. They're I worked with a candidate once who was adamant that the walk sheets needed to stay in the trunk of their car, kind of thing. So it's dealing with different. I've had candidates who only cares about the advertising component and with the local newspapers that there's going to be ads run in. And so a lot of it is dealing with kind of the personality also of the personality of the candidate. And so there's just things like that you have to be able to have a bit of the difference between when you have to be patient and when you have to be kind of be a little bit firmer. You also have to be one thing that I've seen that has been a detriment to some local campaign managers is the inability to make decisions. And so there has to be kind of the judgment that one has to make a quick decision. The difference between making a quick decision with facts and evidence versus not making a decision at all. I think that there is there is in the middle that of quick decisions and seeking too much advice and that comes with experience in terms of working on local campaigns.
Yeah, that's a great segue to something I wanted to talk about or ask you about rather was that whole paralysis by analysis. You get stuck. There's all these different ideas. For anyone on this call who hasn't managed a campaign before, let me just say, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, Jenny, but you will meet so many people who have so many views on what you should do, and so many ideas and so much strategy, so much strategy. So Jenny, let me ask you what your thoughts are on how do you know the difference between something that's an actual, like someone, because, fair enough, like come to me and say, I'm not doing this well or doing that well. And, and I should be open to that, to learn from it. But how do you discern what is like a good nugget that's come forward that's actually going to help you do something differently or better versus just someone who's just talking because they like the sound of their own voice?
Well, as I said, some of it comes from experience, but a lot of it is, I think what you have to do is put it you have to put it in the decision. Is this possibly going to win me votes? Like, is this, like, it's the difference between, is this a vanity project that'll make me feel good because I'm doing something to promote my candidate or myself, like whoever's suggesting it? Is it gratuitously going after your opponent? If I think it has to come down to, is it going to actually win you votes? Like, is it winning you votes versus what's making you, and I'm not saying you or me, I'm saying the person suggesting it. Is it winning votes, or is it just a vanity? It's not a vanity. That I think I'm probably being too harsh. But is it just something that is kind of gratuitously gratuitous in terms of making someone feel good? And I think that it's got to come down to decisions. There's only one goal of an election campaign, and that is to win. And so it's like the goal of a riding association. It's not to develop policy. It's not to debate constitution. It's to build an association and raise the money so that eventually that association will win an election. And so I think that a campaign manager's focus is there's usually like a big board on the wall that says, votes, all that kind of stuff in the campaign manager's office in terms of numbers. So if what you're doing is not going to help you identify a vote and then eventually get that vote out, it seems to be a waste of time.
Yeah. And I think that's always a great thing to bring it back to. And you have, obvious clarity on that, having run so many campaigns. There's so much, sideways energy that could be spent on everything, or, when people want to, really delve into the details of, what's going on there? When people want to delve into the details of, getting the lit from, something that's, 89% good to 91% good and so on. And, asking that question, is this going to help me identify more votes? Is it going to help me get more people out to vote? Or is it going to help me raise money that's going to help me identify more votes and get more people out to vote? So, but it can be daunting, I think, too, like where you just, well-meaning people. And to be clear, I don't mean that people are coming to me with, or you or any campaign manager with malicious intent to distract or so on. They truly want to be helpful. But there's just a lot of thoughts, and sometimes those ideas are completely the opposite. Like you talk about gratuitously going after an opponent, or some people are like, we need to fight, we need to get into this, and other people are like, no, just rise above the fray. And
well, the two things, my advice to people, I get asked this by interns or people getting involved in politics. If you want to walk into a campaign office and help, walk in and say you want to door knock, you want to, I don't know, stuff envelopes, although that's not really a thing anymore. I'm aging myself. Even then, you want to make phone calls. Don't walk in and say that you want to do policy and strategy. Have we lost Steve?
I think we may have lost Steve there. So we'll just wait on Steve and continue the conversation. But so you mentioned people coming and walking into the campaign office saying, "I want a door knock." Is there any other advice you'd have for somebody wanting to get involved in a local campaign on a local level? What would you say to somebody? Maybe they're coming out of college, maybe they're going into college. What would be your advice to somebody who just wants to campaign there?
Listen, my advice would be to just kind of don't say no to any opportunity that you've been given, that you're able to. I'm not saying take away from your studies. I'm not saying take away from anything important. But if you're given the opportunity to go out and door knock or to go to an event with an MP or a candidate, I would say do it. It's one of the things that I did when I was first getting involved in politics. I remember back when we did leaders' dinners, which we don't do anymore. We do receptions. Leaders' dinners are very expensive and onerous, but there were still leaders' dinners. And I remember getting offered a filler ticket, which I didn't even realize was a filler ticket back in the day for Preston Manning's Toronto Leaders' Dinner. And I took the Greyhound bus on the morning of the dinner to Toronto. I changed in the washroom of the Royal York here in Toronto, went to the dinner, changed back into like jeans and a t-shirt, and took the overnight bus back from Toronto to Ottawa. It was a great experience. So it's one of those things that just don't turn down. If you're truly interested, don't turn down any opportunity that you're given, because you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know who is going to kind of see what you're doing, and you don't know what kind of experience you're going to have.
That's great. The answer part of that I heard was great. I apologize. I had something happen with my internet and I got kicked out. So I hope I'm not going to ask a question that was already asked. But did Josh ask you the question from Rick about a first timer yet, or?
He just asked what one would do to get involved, like what to.
Okay, yeah. Great. Yeah, so I had a question, and we'd asked for some to be emailed in, so we pulled a few of them specifically out, and so Rick had a question about, as a newbie in the role, he just asked what would be your number one highest priority in your first step when you're setting up a campaign team. You touched on that a little bit, but just maybe care to elaborate.
Find someone that can recruit volunteers. Mm-hmm. That is the number one thing that you would want in a local campaign, because I don't know about you, Steve, but I found every campaign, maybe a little less the last leadership campaign for mm-hmm. Pierre, because it was a little bit different of experience. Mm-hmm. But up until then, locally, it's hard to find volunteers. People are just, it's not kind of like what it was 20 years ago. And maybe it actually is the same, and I just didn't even realize it. So the number one thing I would do before finding a comms person or what have you, I would find a good person who is connected, that can recruit volunteers. And if they're not connected, they're not afraid to pick up the phone and call, every single riding association member or what have you. Though I think it is the number. It was, if I'm looking for, I'm not saying it's the only, but I'm saying if I'm recruiting for a local campaign, the first person I'm finding is the person that can recruit volunteers.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It is getting harder and harder, and this is something that's outside. I'm involved in kind of church world and things as well, not for profit, and volunteerism, at least anecdotally, or everything I've seen, seems to be, especially post-COVID, seems to be down. Now, yes, Pierre's campaign was different. When I was out in Alberta, someone who was organizing your events there told me all we had to do was whisper his name to the wind, and people would come out of came out of
Well,
nowhere.
I've been involved in politics for a long time, and I've never seen a Canadian leader or Canadian, and he was running. We had 7,000 people in Calgary and 5,000 people in Edmonton. I think I've told the story before of one day Mike Wilson, who is the party lawyer now, but the two of us were spending the, not to sidebar into this, Steve, we were doing a day in southwestern Ontario. We were in Kitchener and then London and Windsor, and we had like 400 people out in Kitchener, and actually we had to do half of it. Pierre was standing on the back of a pickup truck with a megaphone, and then we went to London, and we had a room for 200 people standing, and like 600 people showed up. Wow. And I remember turning to not to curse, but I'm going to.
Go for it.
But I turned to Mike and I just said, "What the fuck is going on?" So anyways, sometimes it's volunteer recruitment wasn't as hard in that campaign, but locally it's very tough. So I would say to anyone that's agreed to sign up in terms of running a local campaign, is your volunteer coordinator, your volunteer recruiter is the first person that I would look at getting.
Yeah. I am going to sidebar just a little bit of that too. So I'm based here in Fredericton right now for this, for the call tonight, and got to see the leader at his event here, and 2,000 people. I'm a Maritimer. To see 2,000 people at a Conservative event was mind blowing. And I, helped just volunteer at the photo line where he stayed for 2 hours straight, and took pictures until everyone was through. But, Jeremy and the team and others that were there, I mean, they had the sign-up sheet. So every time someone said, "I really want to help you," it was like, here you go, right into the system right away. So, it's volunteering is critical.
Oh, it's good. Well, and that was in Fredericton. So that will help our candidate, Brian McDonald.
That's right.
Hopefully engage some people. And I know he's been knocking on doors and stuff like that. So, it's the number one task. I'm not saying all you people that do other things on a campaign, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying the first task is for volunteers.
Yeah. Well, because the person who can do the recruiting can get the people like the other people you just talked about, like to get them into the network and onto the team, so the website can get set up and
the person. Here's the thing: the person that's going to be in charge of GOTV can't do GOTV if they don't have the bodies to be able to do it.
100%. So speaking of GOTV, question from Connor here, who asked the age-old questions, and now I know he knows you, so he's couching this. He's like, rest assured, I will always go knock doors in any weather. So he's like, he's already an apology or apologetic. But he's like, what are your thoughts on the kind of the balance between GOTV versus persuasion? And how much can tactics move the needle, kind of in your view? So, but he reiterates, I will knock doors.
Well, Connor, I guess the difference between the two of them is time efficiency. GOTV is very efficient. You're knocking, you're only hitting the doors that if you're knocking, you're only hitting the doors that are your supporters. You're only calling the people that are your supporters. You're only texting now the people that are your supporters, or emailing them. Persuasion takes a little bit more time. And so what I've done in local campaigns, and actually in the national campaign, is you have people that are there are people that are just never going to want to knock on doors and do the GOTV and what have you, but they're willing to have like a conversation. It's also a good job for a candidate who it's a rainy day, they can't knock on doors, although they're not sugar, they won't melt, you can put them out on doors. But there are instances where a candidate can't knock on doors. You can have them do persuasion. So we've had in the past a team of people we've had, like when we've had more of a surplus of volunteers, you have a persuasion phone bank that calls people that are like unsure, people that actually kind of know the policies a little bit better and can have conversations in terms of persuasion. But if I had 5 people and you had to pick between persuasion and GOTV, I'm going to GOTV because it's much more bang for your buck.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next one is from a person whose name I'm going to withhold because I know they've just moved into a job that requires them to be nonpartisan, but they had submitted this when we were, kind of before they moved into that job. So, and this gets into that, what we talked about, you mentioned about the fine line between making a decision too quickly versus never landing the plane. Says, as a local campaign manager, kind of what are the best practices, or what have you done to kind of reach timely decisions, or to make timely decisions that allow kind of people to have their say and, get their buy-in, and you won't always get buy-in, but to get that clarity and move on. Like, how do you convene, and how do you set things up that way?
Well, it's kind of, you want to build a team that you trust and that they trust you. I think you have to be willing to not ask something of the team that you have that you're not willing to do yourself. So I think that, a campaign manager should be out. I think if you're a campaign manager, you should have at least knocked on. I'm not saying every day, because there are other stuff. You should be knocking on doors. You should be making phone calls. You should be doing the stuff that you're asking your team to do. And I think that helps. Build trust. So I think that you also have to be decisive, but you have to also listen. The one thing I have learned in every campaign I've managed, both locally or nationally, is that I don't know everything, despite, as I said, sometimes thinking I do. You don't know everything. And there has never been one campaign I've been involved with that I have not learned something, and in most cases, numerous things. And so I think you have to be willing to realize that there are different ways out there to do things, and that it is, if you're bringing people in to play senior roles and to be part of your team, you may not agree with them, and you may, overrule a suggestion or a decision, but you have to genuinely listen, because otherwise you may be overlooking a decision that's going to help your campaign, your candidate, and you ultimately, as the campaign manager. So I think collaboration, knowing when to collaborate, and knowing when the collaboration, as you said, what did you say the Paul Martin thing was, Steve?
The groupthink.
Groupthink. Yeah. I think it's learning the difference between that. But I think that sometimes that in terms of running campaigns, people can be dismissive, and I think that that is a huge mistake, and it's when it's to the detriment of the campaign.
Yeah. Just on a personal level, I'm going to just derive from I had the questions here, but just, it's a lot. I don't know how you feel, but sometimes for me, it's a lot of weight on your shoulders, right? Because everyone looks to you, and you can be the decider on something. So, and you're often the name that gets associated with decisions that get made. And, sometimes, even if you didn't agree with the decision, like, there it is, and your name's attached to it. But like, how do you just personally, like, you must have had to build up a thick skin kind of over the years, or kind of, used to bearing that weight of kind of having to make the decisions.
Yeah, well, with the good comes the bad, with the bad comes the good. So, listen, there are times where decisions are made that there have been decisions made that I don't agree with, and there are decisions that I've made that have been right, and I've made that have been wrong. But at the end of the day, when you're managing a campaign, it doesn't matter. You take the good with the bad, and so you do have to have a thick skin. I have weirdly, I have developed I don't read a lot about. I don't read about myself. I am fine with what people say. I know there's a lot of people out there that talk about things that people say on Twitter about people and what have you. I had someone that worked with me back during the 2015 campaign that said, and I didn't have my own Twitter at the time. I had the staff run it, and they basically said you could tweet something out that from your account that could be the a cat on a holding onto a pipe that says hang on, it's Friday, and it would basically be like go fuck yourself, Jenny Burke. So, like I've had people that have tweeted at me saying, I hope you get cancer, you stupid bitch, and die. Like people are not. You just have to have a thick skin, and if you're not willing to have it, that's fine. It's just it makes life a lot easier if you have it, because if you're upset every time someone says something bad about you, it's just you're going to be upset all the time, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, as an encouragement to you, I mean, I think that part of the reason that you are a target is because you're successful, right? And if you were just a well-meaning whatever, like just out there doing your best but never winning, like probably they're not going to waste their time coming at you. Some people would, because some people are just horrible human beings, but in terms of, I think the attention you get is because you have a track record of success, and these people just want to kind of tear you down. So I appreciate what you're going through, and and good on you for not reading that stuff, because I do my best to not read. I don't get nearly the traffic that you get, but I do my best to steer clear of it, and don't always do well.
It's the best way. Way.
It's true. Every day I'm not on Twitter, my life is better, actually. There's a question here from Barbara, and this one's a little bit more specific on the digital side. So, what if you have something to offer, it's great, but just wants to kind of know about what digital tools, techniques, and processes have been used, and kind of maybe successfully at a local level. Like, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I think that we've been successful in terms of digital, in terms of, and I'm going to include digital in terms of kind of like our technology. The Canadian Alliance, followed by the Conservative Party, was kind of cutting edge with SIMS at the time. Now it's obviously there's SIMS replacement, and people, there's provincial parties that use SIMS and what have you, and but it was cutting edge at the time. And then of course C2G, and then we're going to have various replacement programs with that. So we've kind of always been at the cutting edge of things. And of course now you have digital advertising through Facebook and Google, which is YouTube and what have you, that can be very targeted. So digital campaigning has made, not only from a voter contact point of view, which I put in voter identification and GOTV, very efficient. It's also put into a from a advertising point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the time I stress this with candidates, when using a mobile app to do your ID is just so much more efficient. And I recognize, like, if we've got volunteers who are more comfortable with paper, that's fine. You want to keep your volunteers engaged, and that's great. And we should do that. But it does then require someone staying up at night to enter the information and hope that they got it all right. So can definitely help you streamline things a lot more. Our final block of questions, just kind of coming around the bend here. It's important, I think, at a local campaign level to keep perspective. And, obviously, you have great experience at both the national and local level. And I've heard it said in different places that, people vote kind of on the party leader, party brand, and then sort of like the local campaign. So do you have any kind of insight to share on that? Is that accurate? And do you have sort of I've heard, again, I don't know what gets made up and just, we repeat it so many times, but I've heard anywhere between, like, a local campaign, it's kind of like you can nudge it up anywhere between 4 to 8% of the total thing. Do you have any insights on that, or what's true and what's just mythology?
Yeah, it's people vote essentially on party and leader, and it depends on where kind of the polling is or where people's heads are at. Both Stephen Harper, when he was first elected leader of the Conservative Party, and Pierre as elected leader, if you look at the public polls, the party polled ahead of what the leader did. If you look by 2006, and if you look at the public polls now, Pierre polls ahead of the Conservative Party, and Harper back then in 2005, 2006 polled ahead of the Conservative Party. So the vast majority of people, I think local candidates, usually at the highest watermark, bring 5% of the votes. I know local candidates get very upset, nose out of joint when I say that, but 5% of the vote is kind of the high water end. I think there are exceptions. I think if Wayne Gretzky ran somewhere, he would probably get higher. I think really the only time in my experience personally that brought more than 5% would have been Julian Fantino in the 2010 Vaughan by-election. He definitely brought more than 5% of the 5% of the vote. But local candidates bring 5% or less.
Yeah. Now, that's not to minimize it though either. I mean, like, you know, I wouldn't encourage candidates to, oh, you know, don't worry about it then. It's kind of all on central. Like in a close, you know, battleground seat, you know, 5% is
100%. No, 100%. But by name, I'm talking about like takeaway campaign tactics. I'm talking about if it was just Jenny Byrne or Steve Outhouse that were, you know, on a ballot. So it's totally separate from campaign tactics that I'm talking about. It's just straight name. It's just straight name rec.
Now, I don't want you to give away too many trade secrets here, but at least a number of people did ask this question, so I'll at least pose it. Kind of, you know, we always have a finite amount of budget for our local campaigns. Do you have, and of course you can factor in the volunteer factor that you mentioned earlier, but what's the best bang for the buck that you would recommend for people? Like where would you invest more in, or or maybe it's better to say, where do you see people wasting money, you know, typically on a local campaign?
Listen, I think everything that someone should be doing, it calculates into, is this identifying votes, and is this going to get, or is it going to get votes out? I think there are exceptions. I know people love newspaper ads, kind of vanity newspaper ads, although it's a lot different. Like back 20 years ago, there were actually newspapers. There was actually people would go and pick them up. And in rural areas, you know, the editor of the paper was also the sales director of the paper. And I can tell you there have been by-elections that I've been part of that advertising correlated with the coverage that you got in those newspapers. It's a little less like that now when things are mostly digital. But every decision should be made as to how this is getting me votes. How is this winning me votes? Am I getting my vote out?
Connie asked a question here, and again, I think people know your bent. It's very clear from the way they word the questions. They're like, okay, other than door to door, so they start with door to door. What is the second most effective thing a candidate can do to contribute towards their success?
They should make phone calls to do the same thing, and depending on where your riding is sitting, they should raise money.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. Okay. And sorry, that was from Krista, not Connie. My apologies there, Krista. Let's talk a little bit about fundraising here, just in the couple minutes we have left. Local campaigns. I know that sometimes there's a battle. We want to have our spaghetti dinner and get as many people in as we can, you know, but keep the price point really low. You know, versus more high rolling and trying to get larger donors. Like, do you have just a few tips that you would give to local campaign managers as to how they raise the funds they need to win?
Listen, I would say I understand the spaghetti dinners. I've been part of organizing them, like for my local EDA riding association back when we called it that. But at the end of the day, as a campaign manager, I want the lowest effort, highest return in terms of raising money. So a spaghetti dinner, a golf tournament, they are tremendous drains on your resources and on your volunteers. So if you can get the same bang for your buck, if your candidate spending a rainy afternoon that he can't be at the doors, making calls through the past donor list from the previous years and the last election campaign, it seems a little bit more efficient to me than that.
Yeah. You mentioned about the past donor list. I think that this is something that gets overlooked, like, because people get through these campaigns, they win, there's a sigh of relief. Like, they're fighting for their life until, you know, the polls close. And then if they win, all of a sudden it's like, whew. And sometimes it can be like 4 years before, you know, you start thinking about the next election. How important is it, or how much easier can it be? And I'm setting you up to just provide the lecture here to everyone. Like, if you win, like, what can you do to make sure that the next time around you've got, you know, the data you need to, you know, to be as successful as possible?
Well, you've just got to keep the data up. Like the data that the number one thing I would say as a local campaign manager, and then you know, or as a local riding president, or as an MP who will eventually be a candidate again, is you've got to keep your data fresh. There are things to do if, you know, between whether it's a minority or a majority, there are things you've got to do to keep your data fresh, both from a fundraising point of view and from a voter contact point of view. I think there's a lot of people that, you know, a lot of campaigns, a lot of MPs / candidates who, you know, once election day, the day after the election hits, they're like, all right, well, I'll be back at this 6 months before the next election campaign. And that's just not, I just don't think it's sustainable. It's if especially if you're in a riding where it's tough, you need to continue to work that data continually.
Yeah. Look, Jenny, this has been so helpful, and I know so many people are going to take a lot from this. So I appreciate you coming, sharing your expertise. And I'm going to come back to you for just a final word in a moment, but just to remind folks, if you do, we will be posting some more jobs soon, including with an MP's office this coming week, and we've got some other, you know, levels of government talking to us about positions as well. So if you'd like your resume in with Right Recruiter, go ahead and put that in. You know, Jenny, you're, as I said at the beginning, one of the best in the business for sure. You have been very supportive to me in my career, and I appreciate that very much. And yes, you interviewing me to kind of, you know, start working the Harper government is something I will remember forever. As well as that, I remember being at just a quick sidebar. I remember being, you know, at a party with you, like, you know, a social gathering or whatever, you know, months later, or, you know, maybe even a year into government and so on, and my wife being there, and, you know, her just enjoying the people who are around at a party and started to ask you, you know, what you do and what an director of issues management means. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I hope this all goes well, you know. So but no, I really appreciate everything you do for the movement across Canada.
Well, thank you, and the same to you, and thank you for everyone that tuned in. This was a lot of fun.
Great. Have a great night. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and stay tuned for more webinars coming up. Take care.
Thanks so much.